Okay, what I've got here is a selection of photographs with some issues. They're not necessarily bad photographs, it's just that they have color problems or they have a little bit of a contrast issue. And this is largely just a question of what you caught on camera wasn't what you really wanted in the end. One thing that needs to be said about Photoshop and photography. Photography was always manipulative, whether you had Photoshop or not. We always had the darkroom, and it may have been a lot more work, but if I was working in the darkroom and I needed to make this picture a little bit more contrasty so that I could see some darker shadows, I could do that in the darkroom. I did not need Photoshop to do that. Photoshop did not invent manipulation of photographs. Manipulate, by the way, is not in itself a bad word. It is simply the word means to use your hands. And photography, by definition, is manipulation, where we point the camera, what shutter speed do we use, what aperture do we use, where do we focus. All of those choices impact the way the picture looks, probably more than Photoshop does. But if I wanted to make this picture look a little bit more contrasty, I would go to levels or curves. I'm going to show you what they would both look like here. Here's levels. This graph that you see, this is called a histogram, and this basically represents the range of shadows and highlights and midtones in the picture. And if you look at this, you'll realize this gray slider, this represents the midtones, and that's where the bottom of the picture graph starts. We don't really have any shadows. All we have is some middle grays up through some whites. Now you could hit the auto button here. What it tries to do is move these into a better position. But the problem with automatic is it doesn't know what it's looking at. This is simply trying to adjust these sliders. What you would want to do in this case, if you really wanted to make this look much more dramatic, is drag the shadow slider up until it's right at the base of the picture there somewhere. Maybe, sorry, the base of the graph. Right about there looks good. And I took this photo. I was there. This was a very foggy day. This is at Yakima Head in Oregon. I believe this was taken about 20 years ago. I don't have any notes on this. But anyway, very foggy day. And I've just taken this one step to make this look a little bit less foggy. And I'll show you the difference. And that's all through deciding where to put the midtones and the shadows. I left the highlights alone because they're pretty good. It could work the other way. You could have no highlights. The picture could be too gray. You can adjust this per channel. I generally don't. There's got to be a very specific reason why you want to just adjust the green channel. But let's see what curves can do for this. I'm going to turn this layer off, come back down and use curves. Now curves is a little bit intimidating looking compared to, you're probably saying, well, levels was intimidating looking. And I didn't talk about all the settings that were available. But here you see we have a histogram just like we did before. But here, instead of moving the histogram, what we have to move is a line. And there are some presets here. We could say, what happens if we make it medium contrast? That's a little better. And it moves these up or down to indicate grayer or less gray. Let me show you what happens. This is the input and output, basically, along these two lines here, these two bars of the graph. If I drag this one all the way up, I'm basically inverting the colors here. I'm going to drag all of them up. You can see that I've sort of said, make this darker area more of a gray color. That's probably not what we'd want for a photograph, but this gives you an idea of how this works. This is actually moving this. If I take it all to the top, then everything is white. And if I take this right-hand corner all the way down, you'll start seeing what I'm talking about. This is now an inverse of the picture, like a color negative film. So there's positive, there's negative. Now I'm going to switch this back to a standard default, which is this, and show you what I would do here, rather than grabbing one of the presets. You see these eyedroppers, we have 3 of them. We have those in levels too, by the way. This one is for highlights, this one is for midtones, this one is for shadows. And what you want to do here is say to Photoshop, okay, I think this area right here is probably about my whitest white. And it probably is because it didn't change much. And then we're going to look down here. I'm using the space bar to move the picture down. This shadowed area here is in deep in the rocks. This is probably pretty close to black. So I'll click that for my black point. I'm going to zoom back out. That looks pretty good. And notice what has happened here. It's pulled some of these values down to, oh, check it out. It has pulled these values down to almost exactly the base of the histogram where black begins in the histogram. This probably looks a little different from the levels that we did, but not a whole lot. There's the levels adjustment we made. Okay. And here's the curves adjustment we made. By the way, both of them together is too much. So we'll just look at one or the other. This is a little more dramatic looking. But I did that by actually using these to sample parts of the picture. I could also hit the gray one. This is pretty neutral already. But if I decided to say, make this area right here in neutral gray, that actually makes the picture a little warmer. I can move around this and try to find a good neutral gray. But I think that it's okay the way it is. By the way, this is the sort of thing where you might go to your vibrance and drag that up a little bit and make those colors a little more vibrant. So how does it look without it? Let's go even a little further up. You can see it's not making a dramatic difference. We could always grab the saturation slider and add to it, but that starts to be very heavy-handed. But if you are a fan of classic slide films like Kodachrome or Fuji Velvia, that is kind of the look we would expect of a yellow like that. Here it is without that turned on. Much less dramatic. And is it manipulative? Sure. But it might represent the way we felt about this. That this was really bright and noticeable and that the sea was really green. Anyway, that is a little bit we can do. Let's move to another picture. And you'll say, what is this? Well, this is a nighttime scene lit by the overhead sky, but there's this hallway here that's lit by a fluorescent tube. How would I color correct this? I probably wouldn't. I would probably just try to balance for that light in here. This is pretty close already. But you could go to your curves and you could say, make this white. And it made that a little bit brighter. But if I'm trying to make this more of a neutral rather than less blue, I'd click on something that might be a little more, let's try there. That's a little too green. That actually takes it back to its natural color. The building is a white, a sort of an off-white. And now you can see what looks more like a traditional, this is what you would expect to see of a doorway seen from outside at night. You see this less blue. As an artist, I prefer that deep blue. This is kind of what I was going for. And this is a film image. This is pre-digital. This is from the 1990s, actually. But in Photoshop, I'm very able to correct for that and get a more natural color balance with just a couple of clicks by using the neutral eyedropper in curves. And then we come to this one. This is actually pretty close, just a little underexposed. I'm going to show you a cheat. I already spoke to you about not using destructive edits, but there are 3 here that are really useful. One of them is auto tone, which brightens that right up. Unfortunately, that's not available as an adjustment layer. I'm going to undo it so you can see the difference. Auto tone basically removes the color cast and punches the contrast up a little bit. Auto contrast will do just the contrast, which looks almost identical to auto tone, and then in this case, and then auto color tries just to remove the color cast itself. But all of these are destructive edits. I only do these if I'm just in a quick hurry to get something turned around, and I would never do that to the original file. I would open the file, like I've got the file open here, and I would go to File. I would say File Save As, and I would check Save As a Copy and hit Save. And then I would go open that picture, and I would do my change to the copy. The reason for that is I don't want to destroy the original. These are not happening on some kind of adjustment layer that you can come back to later and change. This happens on the pixels, and it's permanent once you save it. So if this looks great, as it does, fine, save it. But if you aren't sure, if you think, well, I might want to change it later, then this is not a good way to work. So if I didn't want that, I could come down to Levels, and I have an auto button here, which gets pretty close. I'd probably bring this a little further in. There we go. And now I've got almost the same level of control without having a pixel change. This is an adjustment layer, and this will not be permanent. If I save this as a Photoshop document, this will still be editable later. All right, so that's a little bit about levels and curves. These other items in here, photo filter, black and white, and invert, posterize, and threshold, there's some fun things happening here, but we're going to leave these for the advanced class. Certainly, black and white conversion is something I want to talk about, but that involves working with color. People are always surprised, why does it involve using color? It's because we make changes to the way the colors are represented in grayscale, which we could not do easily in black and white film. We could do them, but they required a lot of work on the part of the photographer. In Photoshop, it's fairly easy. But we'll see that in the intermediate class. These other settings here, we're going to leave them for now. It's most important that you understand that color balance, hue saturation, vibrance, curves, levels, etc., that these are important as adjustment layers, that they need to be done from this menu right here in the Layers panel, or from the Adjustments panel, which is this one, or from the Layer menu, New Adjustment Layer. These are all non-destructive. If you go to the Image menu and do these adjustments from right here, these are pixel adjustments, and once you save your file, it's baked in, it's permanent. So always use the non-destructive adjustment layer. Don't use the adjustments from this menu unless there's no other way to make it work, which shouldn't ever be the case. You should always be able to use the non-destructive method. And this is because, in a nutshell, it can save you later when you made a mistake and you didn't see it, or you need to fix something that wasn't finished. If you didn't do it as a non-destructive edit to begin with, you may find yourself in the unenviable position of starting over, or you may find yourself having to call your client and say the following words: "I'm sorry, we need to reshoot." You don't really want to do that. So non-destructive editing with adjustment layers is the way to go whenever you're doing any kind of color changes in Photoshop. All right, I'm going to stop this video and we'll pick up with the next one.